The can of cheap red paint felt cold and slick in my hand, a pathetic weapon against a city that had chewed me up and spit me out. Rain plastered my hair to my scalp, blurring the streetlights into watercolor smears on the slick asphalt. The brick wall smelled of damp earth and neglect. It was a fitting canvas. I shook the can, the rattle a small, defiant sound in the sleeping city, and began to spray. I was here. A desperate, childish scrawl. Not her name, never her name again, just a primal declaration against the void she'd left behind. It was a stupid, pointless act, and I knew it. But the hollowness in my chest demanded to be filled with something, even if it was just the acrid smell of aerosol and the sting of cold rain. I was just finishing the last ragged letter when the world split in two behind me, sliced by the silent, blinding white of headlights. My heart seized. I froze, the can still aimed at the wall, a perfect portrait of a low-grade criminal. A police cruiser idled by the curb, its engine a low thrum that vibrated through the soles of my worn-out sneakers. I didn't run. There was nowhere to run to, and honestly, I didn't have the energy. A part of me, the part that was tired of fighting, felt a strange wave of relief. This was it. A concrete consequence. A cell, a fine, a record. Something tangible to hold on to instead of the smoke of my old life. The car door opened with a heavy, final-sounding click. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the headlights. Tall, broad-shouldered, the outline of a service kept sharp against the drizzle. The officer moved with a slow, deliberate economy that was more intimidating than any sudden rush. As she stepped into the weak pool of a street lamp, I could see her face. She was older than me, maybe late 40s, with a strong jaw and lines etched around her eyes that weren't from smiling. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of professional neutrality. "Evening," she said. Her voice was low and steady, carrying easily over the hiss of the rain. It held no judgment, no anger, just a tired sort of authority. I dropped the spray can. It clattered on the pavement, rolling into the gutter where it gurgled pathetically. I waited for the usual script. The demand for ID, the sharp tone, the cold click of handcuffs. I braced myself for it, for the familiar shame. Instead, she just looked from me to the wall, her gaze lingering on my messy red declaration. She took another step closer, and I could smell the scent of rain on her uniform, clean and sharp. She didn't look at me like a criminal. She looked at me like a problem she hadn't decided how to solve yet. "Get in the car," she said, finally. It wasn't a question. My stomach dropped. This was it. I turned, ready to put my hands behind my back, but she just jerked her head toward the passenger side. Front seat, that was wrong. That wasn't protocol. A flicker of fear, real and sharp, cut through my numb resignation. But I was too exhausted to argue. I walked around the hood of the car, the rain dripping from my nose, and slid onto the worn vinyl seat. The door slammed shut, cutting off the sound of the storm and sealing me inside a world that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. The officer got in, the car dipping with her weight, and for a long moment, we just sat in the humming silence, the wipers smearing the rain across the windshield. "Station's a mess tonight," she said, not looking at me. "Big pileup on the interstate, plus a raid downtown. The paperwork for this." She gestured vaguely toward the wall. "I don't have the time. I'm taking you somewhere else to wait it out." She put the car in drive, and we pulled away from the curb, leaving my sad, red message to dissolve in the rain. The drive was silent. Not a comfortable silence, but a heavy one, thick with unspoken questions. I watched the city lights slide by, feeling like a ghost being ferried across some unseen river. My arresting officer, my captor, didn't speak. She just drove, her hands steady on the wheel, her profile illuminated by the green glow of the dashboard. Her name tag read Rohan. I tried to piece her together from the details. The crispness of her uniform, the faint scent of wood smoke clinging to it, the way her gaze flickered to the rearview mirror with practiced vigilance. She didn't seem angry. She seemed contained. A sealed vessel. I was a problem she was managing, a piece of paperwork she was postponing. The city thinned, streetlights giving way to longer and longer stretches of darkness. We turned off the main highway onto a smaller county road then onto an even smaller one that was barely paved. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof of the car like a frantic heartbeat. Trees clawed at the windows, their branches skeletal and black against the night sky. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my exhaustion. Where was she taking me? This wasn't protocol. This was something else entirely. My mind raced through a catalog of horror movie scenarios, each one more ridiculous than the last. But one look at her face, calm and focused on the winding road, quieted the noise. There was no malice there. Just a profound, bone-deep weariness I recognized because I saw it in my own reflection. Finally, she slowed and turned onto a gravel driveway. The headlights swept across the front of a two-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling in the storm. A sprawling porch wrapped around the front, and a single yellow light burned over the door, a small beacon in the overwhelming dark. She killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the rain hammering on the metal roof. "Out," she said, her voice as flat as before. I followed her up the creaking wooden steps. The air was different out here, clean and cold, smelling of wet earth and pine. She unlocked the heavy oak door and pushed it open, stepping aside to let me pass. I hesitated on the threshold, a stray animal uncertain of the trap. "It's just a house," she said, a hint of something impatience, amusement in her voice. I stepped inside. The warmth hit me first, a dry, comforting heat that smelled of old wood, coffee, and something else, something vaguely like cinnamon. The room was simple, a living space dominated by a stone fireplace and bookshelves overflowing with worn paperbacks. It was a home. A real home. It felt solid, rooted. Everything my life wasn't. "Towels in the bathroom, end of the hall," she said, shrugging off her heavy police jacket and hanging it on a peg by the door. Without the uniform, she seemed different. Still imposing, but softer around the edges. She was just a woman in a gray Henley and dark pants. A tired woman who had brought a stray home. "I'll make some coffee." She disappeared into the kitchen without waiting for a response. I stood dripping on her entryway rug, feeling utterly displaced. I found the bathroom, a small, clean space with a clawfoot tub. The towel was thick and white. As I dried my hair, I caught my reflection in the mirror. A pale, hollowed-out girl with rain-smudged mascara and fear in her eyes. I looked like what I was, a mess. When I returned to the living room, she was sitting in a worn leather armchair by the fire, a steaming mug in her hands. Another mug sat on the small table beside the opposite chair. An invitation. I took it, the ceramic warm against my frozen fingers. The coffee was black and strong. We sat in silence again, but this time it was different. It was the silence of the storm outside, the crackle of the fire inside, the shared warmth of the mugs. "Why did you bring me here?" I finally asked, my voice raspy. She looked at the fire, not at me. "I told you. The station is a zoo." It was an excuse, and we both knew it. "You could have just written a ticket. Or let me go." She took a slow sip of her coffee. The firelight carved shadows and highlights onto her face, making her look like something ancient and carved from stone. "Maybe," she said, her voice low. "But you looked like you were one stiff breeze away from falling apart completely." A holding cell didn't seem like the right answer. Her honesty was a quiet blow to the chest. She had seen me. Not just the girl with the spray can, but the desperation behind it. It was terrifying and, in a way I couldn't yet understand, deeply comforting. I didn't know what to say. "Thank you" felt wrong. "I'm sorry" felt inadequate. So I just held my mug, letting the warmth seep into my bones, and watched the fire burn. She didn't press me for details, didn't ask about the graffiti or why a girl like me was out in the rain defacing public property. She just let me be. She let me breathe. And for the first time in months, it felt like my lungs were actually filling with air. I must have fallen asleep in the chair. I woke with a start to the feeling of a heavy blanket being draped over me. Rohan was standing there, her expression softened by the dim firelight. "Guest room's ready," she murmured. "Upstairs, first door on the right." I was too disoriented to argue. I stumbled up the creaking staircase, my body aching with a strange combination of tension and release. The room was sparse but immaculate. A simple iron bed frame, a handmade quilt, a single window looking out into the black, rain-lashed night. There were no personal effects, no photographs, no clutter. It was a room for ghosts, for transients. It was perfect. I collapsed onto the bed without changing, the scent of lavender and cedar from the clean sheets enveloping me. I listened to the sounds of the old house, the groan of wood, the distant howl of the wind, the faint sound of Rohan moving around downstairs. It was a strange lullaby. I was a prisoner in a cop's house, miles from anything I knew, and yet I felt safer than I had in my own apartment for the past year. Sleep came not as a gentle drift, but as a sudden, heavy fall into darkness, pulling me under before I had time to think about how truly and completely lost I was. The next morning, the world was scrubbed clean. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of pale, fragile blue and air so crisp it hurt to breathe. Sunlight streamed through the guest room window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I lay there for a long time, watching them, feeling the quiet of the house settle over me. The oppressive weight that had been sitting on my chest for months felt lighter. Not gone, but shifted. I finally crept downstairs, drawn by the smell of coffee and bacon. Rohan was in the kitchen, standing at the stove with her back to me. She was wearing jeans and a soft, faded flannel shirt, her hair pulled back in a loose, messy bun. She looked less like a cop and more like a farmer, someone whose hands were meant for tilling soil, not writing citations. She turned as I entered, her eyes scanning my face. "Sleep okay?" she asked, her tone neutral. I just nodded, feeling shy and out of place in the bright morning light. The power dynamic from the night before was still there, a low hum beneath the surface of this domestic scene. I was the offender, she was the officer. This was just a pause, an intermission. "There's coffee," she said, gesturing with her spatula towards a pot on the counter. "Help yourself." I poured a mug, my hands moving with an awkward slowness. We ate breakfast at a small wooden table overlooking a wide, green field dotted with a few grazing cows. The silence was less heavy than the night before, filled with the small sounds of country life, a distant bird call, the clink of forks on plates. "So," she started, not looking up from her eggs. The wall I tensed, my stomach clenching. Here it was. The interrogation. It was stupid, I said, my voice small. I was upset about what? It was a direct question, but her voice was gentle, devoid of the sharp edge of official inquiry. I looked out the window at the endless green. What was the point in lying? "My girlfriend," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Ex-girlfriend." She left. Took everything. I felt like I was disappearing. I wanted to leave a mark. Proof that I was still here. I risked a glance at her. She was watching me now, her gaze steady and unreadable. I expected a lecture, a platitude about moving on. Instead, she just gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Sometimes a wall is the only thing that'll listen," she said quietly. The simple, profound understanding in that statement cracked something open inside me. A tear I hadn't realized I was holding back slipped down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily, embarrassed by the show of weakness. Rohan pretended not to notice. She just pushed the plate of bacon towards me. "Eat," she said. "You're too thin." It wasn't an order. It was an act of care, as simple and solid as the farmhouse around us. Later that morning, she took me outside. "Might as well make yourself useful," she said, the ghost of a smile playing on her lips. She handed me a bucket of feed and led me to a small chicken coop. The work was mindless, physical. Tossing grain, gathering eggs, the hens clucking and scattering around my feet. Rohan moved with a familiar ease, her body attuned to the rhythms of the farm. She showed me how to check the water, how to latch the coop securely. Her hand brushed mine as she pointed out a loose board, and a jolt, sharp and unexpected, shot up my arm. I pulled back as if burned. She didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she gave no sign. We worked side by side for an hour, the silence stretching between us, filled only with the sounds of the farm. I found myself watching her. The way the sun caught the silver strands in her hair. The strength in her forearms as she lifted a heavy water trough. The focus in her eyes as she repaired a section of fence. There was a deep stillness about her, a rootedness that I craved. This farm, this quiet life, was her sanctuary. And for a little while, she was letting me share it. But the clock was ticking. I was borrowed time, a stray she couldn't keep. The thought sent a pang of a new, unfamiliar loneliness through me. It wasn't the raw grief over my ex anymore, it was the preemptive ache of losing this. I should probably take you back, she said later, as we stood on the porch, washing our hands with a hose. The water was icy cold. The statement hung in the air, a death sentence for this strange, fragile peace. My heart sank. Back to my empty apartment. Back to the city that felt like a cage. Back to being alone. Okay, I whispered, unable to meet her eyes. I focused on the water sluicing over my hands, washing away the dirt and grime. She turned off the spigot, and the sudden silence was absolute. Maya, she said. It was the first time she'd used my name. I looked up. She was standing closer than I realized, close enough that I could see the flecks of green in her brown eyes. The professional mask was gone. In its place was something raw and vulnerable, something that mirrored the hollow ache in my own chest. I don't want to, she said, her voice barely a breath. The admission was a tectonic shift, rearranging the landscape between us. The cop and the criminal, the rescuer and the rescued, all of it fell away. We were just two women on a porch, caught in the gravitational pull of a shared loneliness. She didn't move, didn't touch me. She just held my gaze, her own full of a question she seemed afraid to ask. And in that moment, I understood. She wasn't just being kind. She had brought me here for her, too. I was a disruption to her solitude, a reminder of a world she had tried to leave behind, but also, maybe, a flicker of connection in the quiet dark. My own fear was a frantic bird beating against my ribs, but a stronger, deeper current was pulling me forward. I was so tired of being afraid of running. I took the one small step that separated us. I raised a trembling hand and gently brushed a stray piece of straw from her hair. Her breath hitched. Her eyes fluttered shut for a fraction of a second. It was the only permission I needed. I leaned in and pressed my lips to hers. It was a hesitant kiss at first, tentative and questioning. Her lips were soft, tasting of coffee and the clean country air. Then she made a small sound in the back of her throat, a sigh of surrender, and her hand came up to cup the back of my neck, her fingers tangling in my still damp hair. The kiss deepened, becoming a conversation we couldn't have with words. It was a kiss of shared solitude, of unexpected sanctuary. It wasn't about passion in that first moment, it was about recognition. I see you. I see your pain. I have it too. It was a quiet, desperate collision of two people who had forgotten what it felt like to be held. When we finally broke apart, we just rested our foreheads together, breathing each other's air. The world outside the bubble of her porch, with its laws and consequences, didn't matter. Stay, she whispered against my lips. It wasn't a question or a command. It was a plea. Okay, I whispered back. And for the first time, it felt like the truth. The next day, the world had to be dealt with. We sat at the kitchen table, the morning sun warming our faces, a half-finished pot of coffee between us. The easy intimacy of the morning after felt both brand new and ancient. Her hand rested near mine on the table, not quite touching, but the space between them vibrated with energy. The wall, she said, her voice practical, but her eyes were soft. We have to deal with the wall, I nodded. The stupid, red scrawl that had started all of this. There will be a report, she explained. A citation for misdemeanor vandalism. I can't make it disappear, I know, I said. I wasn't scared anymore. It was just a problem to be solved. But, she continued, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips, the recommended sentence is usually community service. Often, cleaning up the mess you made, she finally closed the small gap between our hands, her fingers lacing through mine. Her touch was warm and solid. I can drive you, she said. It was a simple offer, but it meant everything. She wasn't sending me back to my old life. She was coming with me to face it. She drove me back to the city in her personal truck, a battered Ford that smelled of hay and dog. The police cruiser was a memory from another lifetime. We didn't talk much on the drive, but her hand rested on the center console, close enough for our knuckles to brush with every bump in the road. She walked with me into the small municipal building, her presence a quiet shield. She spoke to the clerk, her voice calm and official, explaining the situation in clipped, professional terms. I was given a court date and a form for community service. The whole process took 20 minutes. 20 minutes to untangle the knot that had felt like the end of the world 2 days ago. As we walked out into the bright, indifferent city sunlight, I felt the lightness I hadn't known was possible. "I have to clean it," I said, looking in the direction of the wall. "I'll help you," she said, without hesitation. We bought buckets, brushes, and gray paint that matched the old brick. We spent the afternoon working side by side, scrubbing away the last remnants of my desperate cry into the void. It was hard work, my muscles protesting, but it felt good. It felt like an act of cleansing, of closing a chapter. With every scrub of the brush, I was erasing the ghost of my past, and with every shared glance with Eva, that was her name, I had finally asked, I was painting the first strokes of a future I never could have imagined. By the time we were done, the wall was just a wall again, anonymous and clean, holding no trace of my pain. We stood back, looking at our work. My hands were sore, splattered with gray paint. Eva had a smudge of it on her cheek. I reached out and wiped it away with my thumb. She leaned into my touch, her eyes closing for a moment. "Thank you," I said. It was for everything. For not arresting me. For the coffee, the blanket, the bed. For helping me clean up a mess that was so much bigger than a few lines of spray paint. "Come home," she said. It was that simple. Home. A farmhouse I'd only known for 2 days. A woman I had met under the worst possible circumstances. But it was the only thing that felt true. I followed her back to the farm. That night, we made dinner together, moving around her kitchen in an easy, comfortable dance. We talked about everything and nothing. About my failed attempt at being a graphic designer, about her 20 years on the force, about the scars, visible and invisible, that we both carried. We were mapping the terrain of each other's lives, finding the common ground. Later, lying in her bed, with the sound of crickets outside the open window and her arm a heavy, comforting weight across my waist, I thought about the strange, crooked path that had led me here. I had gone out that night to leave a mark, to prove that I existed. I had ended up finding a place where I didn't need to shout to be seen. I was just here. And for the first time in a very long time, that was more than enough.